In our last video, we were looking into, in a fresh way and a new way, as to why men in our subject in this long series of pornography and masturbation orgasm are directed particularly to men, but they can be directed to women as well. However, in the first video, we began to discuss the dilemma as to why a man would find himself in this perpetual loop of succeeding and then failing, succeeding and failing, and just an endless and perhaps a cycle and a loop that a man might go through for many decades. I do well for 2 days and then I fail. I do well for 4 days and then I fail. And I do well for 5 or a week or a couple of weeks, but then I fail. And there's this endless loop that is extremely frustrating for a man who can only be set free and is finding freedom from sexual sin only for a short period of time, or some period of time. Let me just say some period of time. It can be hours, it can be days, and it can be weeks, and it can be months. But the question is, why would we succeed in that degree, but then why would I fail 9 days later, 2 weeks later, and then find myself working back into success? So I want to offer some men some insights that I have into that I hope will be very, very helpful. I think they will be. And we began in our first video talking about what I'll call now, I did not call it in our first video, but I'll call it a lukewarm commitment. And I'm going to be a little bit more specific, a lukewarm commitment to follow Christ in this sexual area. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is when a man oftentimes will say, I'm not going to do this today. They're saying no to today, but that no is a very temporary no. It's not a permanent no. It's not, I'm never going to do this again. Well, it's not, I hope I don't do it today, and I'm going to exert energy today to not do it today. But oftentimes that person fails, and they fail because they really aren't highly committed. They're lukewarm committed to Christ in this area. And a lukewarm commitment in this sexual area to succeed, usually, if not often, and even probably most of the time, is not going to be effective in helping you to spin out of this sexual slavery into a gospel freedom and liberty and purity and faithfulness as well. So a man might be saying, here's what it looks like. There's 3 ways that you can deal with temptation, sexual temptation. You can say no. You can say, yes, no, I'm not going to. Yes, I am going to sin, or I haven't made up my mind. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Now, the men who are in this loop are oftentimes saying, well, I'm going to say no today, and perhaps the next day, but I'm not going to say yes, but I'm going to say no today. But in terms of the future, I'm really not committed to saying never, but I will say no. And what that means is that the man has moved from no really to maybe. I haven't made up my mind. Now, in the mind of a man, and that might be a whole lot better, and it might look like obedience, because I'm not saying yes, I'm going to do this. But a man oftentimes thinks, because I'm not saying yes, then I'm in a good position, which means no, but I'm not really sure about the next day. And what I've tried to impress upon men in this area is there are not 3 ways to deal with sexual temptation. No is the proper way. Of course, yes is saying I'm going to sin, and that's what I've made up my mind to do. But maybe, pay attention to this, it's very important. Maybe, I'm not sure what I'm going to do tomorrow or the next day, is really a yes, I am going to do it. Sorry about that. So there's no, there's yes, and maybe. Maybe is really a yes. And it always ends up being a yes, and that's why it falls into the yes category and not the no category. Because no means, biblically no means no, never, but maybe means yes, ultimately I'm going to do that. And so if you find yourself in this loop, it's oftentimes because you're in a maybe category. You're putting a great deal of effort into being faithful and saying no, but you fall back into the loop because maybe I will, maybe I won't, really is a yes. And it does not fortify you and strengthen you to be able to say no tomorrow, the next day, when temptation and all those strong desires accompany the temptation. So this lukewarm commitment is rarely going to be blessed by the Holy Spirit to be able to be set free to sexual purity. And I mean that. The Holy Spirit looks at that lukewarm commitment and says, no, I'm not going to bless that. I've told you how to be set free from this. It's no, never. I'm going to put it to death. And I will bless that strategy every hour, every day, and every week, and every month. But if you deviate from putting it to death, to maybe you're really giving it life instead of putting it to death. And the Holy Spirit can discern whether you're saying, no, I'm putting it to death, or I'm not putting it to death, and I'm really very lukewarm in my commitment about this. The Holy Spirit may very well draw back, and then you're left alone in your own resources to deal with temptation and the strong desires that come with temptation, and that's oftentimes found to be impossible to be able to resist under those circumstances. The Holy Spirit has one strategy with dealing with sexual sin, and that is saying no and putting it to death now and forever, and He will bless that. And He'll give you success in that. But if that definitive no, never drifts back into a maybe, well, then that's a lukewarm commitment and a lukewarm relationship with Christ. And what we learn about lukewarmness in the book of Revelation ought to teach us that the Lord is not going to bless that really as a strategy. I hope that's helpful and brings clarity to you as to why you might be in this endless loop of success and failure. There's no, I'm not going to do this, never, and I'm going to perpetually put this to death. Or I'm going to say yes, but if I'm undecided, then that's a lukewarm commitment. It's not a no, and therefore the Holy Spirit will not bless it. And then we're left to our own resources. And when we were left to our own resources in dealing with this long time habitual sin, we're helpless. We need divine resources. And the way that we're going to acquire the Holy Spirit's help is to get out of that lukewarm category and say, no, never, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to put this to death. That's one explanation as to why a man would find himself in this very long, endless loop of success and failure. Now, the average man would say, who struggled with this for many years and maybe even decades, would say, Jeff, I'm really offended by what you're saying because I am committed. I've been working on this problem for 25 years, and I can't break free from this loop. And for you to say I'm not really committed is ridiculous. I've been working on this for 25 years. And so I'm offended and insulted that you would tell me that I'm not really committed to getting rid of this. Well, I want to give you two thoughts about that. Number one, I commend you for working at it for such a long period of time, but you've got to be wondering, why can't I break free? Well, we got to look at this thing very honestly, and I want to offer you a couple of other thoughts here about why you haven't been able to break free and why I'm suggesting that it is due to a lukewarm commitment. If I said, look, I want you to be committed to never be crossing this street, cross your front street out in your front yard. If you were committed to never do that, then I would suspect in 1 week and 1 month and 1 year, you would have said to me, no, I've never crossed the street because I've been committed to never cross the street. And obviously, you would be able to say a year later, well, of course I've never crossed the street because I committed myself to never cross the street. But if you told me that you were committed never to cross the street, and I came back to you 2 months later and I asked you, well, have you crossed the street? And you go, well, yeah, a couple times. Well, then I would say, well, obviously you're not committed. If you were really committed to not cross the street, you wouldn't have crossed the street. You might have been tempted, but you said, no, never. I'm never crossing the street. But if you cross the street, well, what does that say about your commitment? It means that, well, I said never, but I didn't really mean never. I meant it when I said it, but maybe I changed my mind into a maybe, or maybe I changed my mind. But the point is, if you had committed yourself to never cross the street and you kept that commitment, if I came back to you 6 months later, have you crossed the street? You'd say no. Well, then I know that you were committed to never cross the street. But again, if you made that commitment and I came back to you 6 months later, I said, have you crossed the street? And you said yes. I would have said, well, obviously you weren't really committed to never crossing the street, because your crossing the street reveals that something changed on your commitment level. You went from no to maybe yes or maybe. And so I would have said, well, obviously you never were committed. And you, oh, no, I'm really committed to never doing it. But wait a minute, you did it, which means to me, no, you were not really never committed to not cross the street. Do you follow what I'm saying? A man who who is committed in marriage not to commit adultery, most men are most committed not to commit adultery. But when they commit the adultery, or when a woman commits adultery, they make a promise in their wedding vows never to do this. But when they do it, what's that say about their commitment never to do it? Well, it means that they changed their mind about never committing adultery. When a man tells me that he's committed adultery, a woman tells me that he's never committed adultery, I said, well, the problem started in the beginning because you obviously didn't mean it when you said you were never going to do it. Because if you were committed to never, ever do it and live out that never for the rest of your life, which is what we're committing ourselves to do, you would never commit adultery. But if you've committed adultery, then that reveals the fact that you really were not committed to never do it. And that's something that that's what's really going on, Art. Another aspect to this, and I've mentioned this in an earlier video, that is that a man who spent 25 years trying to not do this, but finds himself in this loop, needs to be commended for putting that kind of effort into trying to be done with this very sinful thing of pornography and masturbation and orgasm outside of marriage. But what I would also, in conclusion, say to that man, I know that you've put a great deal of effort into trying to be faithful here. You have been 49% committed to not doing this. And that's a lot of commitment. That's a lot of effort. But you know what? 51% of you has been open to doing it, and that's why you've gone back to doing it. See, if you're 49% committed not to do this, but you keep on doing it, well, you're a little bit more committed to doing it than you are not doing it. You might be 49% and highly committed not to do this. But if you're 51% committed to be open to doing it, well, what's going to win? What's going to win out the day there? Well, whatever the 51% is, it's going to carry the day. 49% is not going to carry the day. You may be really committed, but if you're only committed to 49% not doing this ever again, well, then you're going to do it again, because 51% of you is committed and open to doing it again. And that's another explanation as to why you may have put a lot of effort into it, but it's not paid off. Because the only commitment that really the Holy Spirit will bless is, I am never going to do this again. I'm going to never do this again. And living out that never and putting it to death and being resolved for the rest of your life not to do that. If I asked a friend of mine, well, on your married day, your wedding day, you said you were going to forsake all others and be sexually faithful to your wife. and I were to come back to my friend and say, well, hey, look, have you been faithful to your wife? Have you committed adultery? And he would say, no, I've not committed adultery. And I would say, well, and I would understand, well, he's living out his commitment that he made. But if I were to say to him, have you done pornography and masturbation and orgasm in your marriage? And he was, no, I have not done that. Well, then I would say, I would have an understanding that he is living out that commitment that he made 20 years ago. And that's the way it's meant to be. When we make vows on our wedding day, we're making vows to be faithful and pure and solely sexual with our wives and not with other women. But if I'm doing pornography, if I'm married and I'm doing pornography and masturbation, orgasm, well, then I'm not being faithful to my wife. And we have to continue to try to address why this loop is taking place. Okay. One reason review just very quickly here. If you have a lukewarm commitment, that is contrary to, you also have a lukewarm commitment to Christ in this area. And he's not going to bless a lukewarmness when you bring it to this particular matter. Lukewarmness also means that you're only bringing to this effort 49%. And that's not going to be adequate enough to be able to be done with this once and for all and for the rest of your marriage. That kind of lukewarm commitment is only 49% of an effort, 49% of a commitment. And that's not going to really win the day. 51%, you're still open to it, and that's what's going to carry the day, and that's going to cause you to be in this endless loop. I hope that's helpful. We're going to continue to look at other reasons why a man or a woman might find themselves in this loop, and I think you're going to find the subsequent videos to this number 2 video equally as helpful in helping you to be set free in this matter.